guys, we're making slow but decent progress on the 65 Comet suspension. And as you can see behind me, the Ups guy brought some boxes for me. Let's dive in and see what we got in there. Alright guys, so as you can see behind me, we've teamed up with QA1 on the 65 Comet build. I've always looked at their products through catalogs, and you know what? I never thought the day would come that we're actually working together on a build as such. Basically what QA1 has sent us is their 65 to 66 Mustang front coilover system and rear shocks. Now, I'm just going to put it out there. This is not designed yet for a 65 Comet and Falcons, etc. This is for Mustang, so they haven't done their testing. But that's essentially what I'm going to be doing here, is I'm going to be adapting these to work on the 65 Comet. So what I want to talk about is the top shock mounting system. Basically, that's the main difference between a Comet and a Mustang. Comet has a stud with just a nut on the top, whereas the top shock for a Mustang is a T-bar style. So everything else is the same in the sense of mounting, shock tower cap, everything is the same. That is why I think this is going to work on the Comet. Looking over the parts that they sent us, we got double adjustable front shocks, as you can see there, and double adjustable rear shocks. Obviously this is for the coilover system, which these are the front springs. These are 450 weight springs. So I'm really excited to get these installed on the Comet and actually get it rolling and driving with this system, because this car needs to get mobile. So we got to get the front suspension on and we got to get the brakes all figured out. And once that's done, we're going to be able to move the car forward to install the engine and transmission. Let's get to work. Alright, so we started the assembly process on the front coilover setup. As you can see, we've already put a coat of anti-seize on the threads, screwed these all the way down. There's two pieces here. One is a locker and one is a spring seat collar. So the one I'm moving is the seat collar. And then you can see there's a washer, spring washer right there. So that's all coated. The bottom side of the spring washer is coated as well. And I just wanted to point out the differences between a Mustang style and the Comet style, and then the QA1 shock cap. So different years here. I believe this is a 69, and then this is, I believe, a 65. So we're just going to keep this one out of the picture. But you can see the height differences between the Comets and the Mustangs. This is a T-bar style, this is a stud style, so just a single stud for the shock coming with a nut at the top. And then this is their QA1 style, which is a bolt going through right there. As you can see here, it's got a spherical bearing there, which is nice. So a little bit of height difference, but nothing that's gonna be too crucial. So everything mounts the exact same. I already have one of these mounted on the car using all the factory hardware, so all bolt in, no drilling or cutting required. And then inside the wheel well, you can see I actually put a wood clamp, which is basically just spreading the distance from the upper control arm to the top shock or spring cap there, just so we can squeeze in the coilover assembly a lot nicer than trying to fight it. So that's just putting downwards pressure on this whole suspension assembly. And back over here we have the coil spring, and the Comet's spring insulator wasn't there. It was just deteriorated over time. So what I got was a heater hose, and I just put it around the top spring. Wrapped it in some electrical tape, and that should do the trick, because I don't want to wait 2 weeks for a new one. So we're going to do the same thing to this one here and get these installed. Alright guys, so as you see behind me, we got the Comet on the ground, we got all the suspension on, all the brakes on, and then I realized I forgot something. This is the thrust bearings that basically sit under the coil spring and allow for smoother rotation when the coil spring is being compressed while driving. And yeah, I forgot them, so we're going to have to tear it all apart again, install these, and reassemble. Unfortunately, you're probably going to see a little bit of the brakes, which we already have installed, as I mentioned before, which will be talked about in the next episode and show you all about that. But yeah, let's dig into it again. So just a little sneak peek at the install, and basically the thrust bearing will sit right in here. So normally they just option it with the spring washer here. With the thrust bearing, it's the spring washer, thrust bearing, and then another spring washer, which again just allows the spring to rotate or articulate in a smoother fashion for longevity purposes. So yeah, so we're gonna have to take this all apart again. No big deal. Take it all apart again and install that and go from there. So you may have seen me just use a wood clamp to compress the spring. It's just, I liked it better than the other spring compressor just because it had these rubber pucks on there, so it protects the coating on the spring itself. Basically, just all I did was I just compressed that a little bit, just in order to be able to take the resistance off of the top of the shock tower and the upper control arm, because that was under tension. And it just allowed me to pull that out as one whole unit. Made it a little easier. So we're going to take this spring off, get this, or we can just slide the shock out of here, I guess. And basically this spring washer right here is where the thrust bearing or roller bearing setup is going to reside now. So we're going to do that, get that installed. I believe I have to clean the anti-seize up and put grease there instead. I'll read over the instructions just to make sure and go from there. Alright, so just on the bench looking over the instructions, and right here you'll find at number 2 it says QA1 highly recommends using the QA1 thrust bearing kit, part number blah blah blah, for ease of adjustment. If the thrust bearing kit is used, coat both sides of the washer with anti-seize lubricant, install the stainless steel spring seat washer, then the thrust bearing, then the top washer. So I don't have to worry about cleaning off any of this anti-seize. We're going to actually lubricate more with anti-seize. Put the thrust bearing on and then put the other washer on and get it reinstalled. Little hiccup, but nothing little work won't solve. Alright, so for those of you that don't know what thrust bearings do, pretty well, they're little roller bearings, as you can see there. And what it does is it allows for free articulation of things. So basically every movement that the coil spring does, or if you're adjusting your coil spring itself, by changing this adjustment here up and down. It just allows for free articulation and mobility, and that goes for everything that you make rollerized. So just like I mentioned in the last video with the open tracker parts, he makes all the control arms rollerized, along with the idler arms, the spring perches. Basically anything that used to have some form of rubber bushing now has a roller bearing, which again allows for free articulation. So whenever you can do that, it's best suited. So this is what we're going to be doing for the thrust bearing. So we're going to get that all installed and get it back on the car. That was a little more work than I was expecting, but I think it went in easier the first time, but nonetheless, got it all in. Word of advice, definitely have something that's pushing down on the control arm, and if you can get some form of spring compressor in there, you may want to do so, just because it is a pretty snug fit. But these are tight. Gonna put on the upper shock mount and go on the inverter machine because my back hurts now. Like I said, all kidding aside, the quality of the part is phenomenal, and I'm just playing around with you guys, but definitely gonna have to put a jack on this in order to get this upper shock mount fully up. So now we're just gonna slowly jack it up, and you'll start to see that bolt hole line itself up. Once it's in the location, you can slide this, slide the bolt through, and then put the lock washer or lock nut on the back, tighten her down to torque spec, call her a day. Like I said, I'm going to do that to the other side. Get the passenger side all done. Get this side wrapped up. Get that side finished. Lower it back down. Show you the rear, which was filmed previously. And that'll be it for this episode. Alright, so the more times you do something, the easier it gets. And I found an easier way to put these coilovers in. So I'm going to show you that right now in case you're doing it and don't want to go through the struggle that I've gone through about 3 times. This was way easier. Utilized the jack. Basically all I did was I placed the coilover in place on the control arm, but I didn't bolt it in. And basically what I did was I jacked up the lower control arm, which pushed the shock up into the shock tower. I was able to put the bolt through the top, and then that gave it some compression already. So rather than me trying to spread apart something, I added some compression. And now all I have to do is bolt on the 2 lower bolts onto the upper control arm, and we're good to go. So I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. All right, so like I said, I put the jack onto the lower control arm. I placed the entire setup basically just sitting right here, and I jacked it up, which pushed some compression onto the spring and also raised up the shock, which I was able to put the bolt in. And then once I lowered the jack, everything just kind of fell into place. Oh my god. It's funny what happens when you use your brain sometimes. So I'm going to put the 2 lower nuts and bolts on, and we'll be done here. Alright, so we also got the rear shocks installed, which I'll show you in just a sec once we finish up with the fronts, of course. And make sure to keep your eyes on just the rear shocks, because there may be a few things that you haven't seen before. So, I'm watching you, wherever you are, right there. I'm watching. Alright guys, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Classic Mustangs 429. Had a little hiccup there in the sense of forgetting a part, but we got it all back together, and the next thing that you're going to see is the brake install. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to support the channel.